My name is Rachel, and for 34 years, I believed my family loved me. I believed that even though my parents favored my older brother Daniel in small, quiet ways, better birthday gifts, more attention at dinner, the master bedroom when he moved back home at 26, that underneath it all, we were a family. That blood meant something. That when it mattered most, they would choose me too. I was wrong, and it took my father's death for me to find out just how wrong I was. Let me back up. I grew up in a modest house in Ohio, the kind of house with a creaky porch swing and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee. My father, Walter, ran a small hardware store for 30 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and over the decades, he quietly invested every spare dollar into real estate. By the time I was in my 20s, my father owned 4 rental properties, a small commercial building downtown, and a decent stock portfolio. None of us knew the full extent of it. He was a private man. Money talk is for funerals, he used to joke. None of us laughed at the time. None of us knew how true that joke would become. My mother, Linda, passed away when I was 28 from a sudden stroke. It devastated all of us, but it devastated my father most. He became quieter after that, more withdrawn. Daniel, who had always been the golden child, moved back into the family home 2 years later after his second business. A craft brewery that never quite took off, went under. My father let him stay rent-free. I was renting a 1-bedroom apartment 40 minutes away, working as a paralegal, raising my daughter Emma as a single mother after my divorce. I never asked my father for a dime, not once. Every Sunday, without exception, I drove 40 minutes to have dinner with my father. I brought Emma. I helped him with his medications after his diabetes diagnosis. I drove him to doctor's appointments. I organized his pill schedule on a whiteboard in his kitchen. I called him every single night before bed, just to check in, just to hear his voice. Daniel visited maybe once a month, usually when he needed money. I'm not saying this to make myself sound like a saint. I'm saying this because it matters for what happened next. My father passed away in March, peacefully, in his sleep, at 78 years old. The funeral was small. Just family, a few old friends from the hardware store days, our neighbors. Daniel cried more than anyone. I remember thinking, at the time, that grief brings out strange things in people. I held his hand at the funeral. I told him we'd get through this together. I meant it. 2 weeks after the funeral, Daniel called me. Hey, Rach. So, Dad's lawyer wants to do a reading of the will. Thursday, 2 o'clock. You free? Of course, I said. I'll take the afternoon off. Cool. It's just going to be a formality, though. You know how Dad was. He probably split everything 50-50 between us. Nothing crazy. Something in his voice felt off. A little too casual. A little too rehearsed. But I brushed it aside. Grief makes people weird. I told myself that. Thursday came. I drove to the law office downtown, a place I'd actually worked at briefly years ago before I moved to my current firm. The receptionist recognized me and gave me a sad smile. So sorry about your dad, Rachel. He was always so proud of you. That comment would come back to haunt me later. We were led into a conference room. Daniel was already there, sitting comfortably, scrolling on his phone like he was waiting for a dentist appointment. He barely looked up when I walked in. Hey, he said. Hey, I replied, sitting down across from him. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Patterson, gray-haired, kind eyes, someone who had known my father for over 20 years, walked in with a thick folder. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at both of us with an expression I couldn't quite read, almost apologetic. Before I begin, he said slowly, I want to say that your father came to me about 8 months ago to make significant changes to his estate plan. He was very clear and very deliberate about what he wanted. I advised him on the legal implications, but the decisions were entirely his. Daniel shifted in his seat. I noticed it. A small, almost imperceptible shift. Like he already knew what was coming. Mr. Patterson opened the folder. The bulk of Walter's estate, including the family home, the 4 rental properties, the downtown commercial building, and the investment portfolio, totaling approximately $2.3 million, has been left in its entirety to Rachel. I sat there, frozen. I genuinely thought I had misheard him. To me? I said. All of it? All of it, Mr. Patterson confirmed. There's also a letter he asked me to read aloud, addressed to both of you. I looked at Daniel. His face had gone pale, then red. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. What about me? Daniel asked, his voice tight. Mr. Patterson glanced at the document. Daniel, you are left a sum of $10,000, along with your father's wristwatch and his car. $10,000 out of $2.3 million. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anything except confusion and a slow, creeping dread, because I knew. Daniel was not going to take this quietly. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and began reading the letter. To my children, Rachel and Daniel. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and I'm sorry I'm not there to explain this to your faces. I loved you both equally, but I learned things in my final years that I could not ignore. Rachel, you have shown up for me every single day without being asked. You drove me to appointments, you managed my medications, you never once asked me for money even when I know things were tight for you and Emma. You did this not because you wanted anything from me, but because that's who you are. I want you to have security. I want you to never have to worry the way I know you worried for years. This home and everything in it is yours. Daniel, I love you, son. But over the past several years, I've discovered things I wish I hadn't. The loans you asked me for, totaling over $140,000, were never loans. We both know that. The credit card you took out in my name 3 years ago without my knowledge, the one that nearly destroyed my credit score, the one I only found out about because the bank called me directly. I know about that too. I forgave you for it because you're my son. But I cannot, in good conscience, leave the rest of what I built to someone who would do that to me, especially while telling your sister and everyone else that you were helping me with my finances. I hope someday you understand why I made this choice. I love you both. Take care of each other. Dad. The room went dead silent. I turned to look at Daniel. His face had drained of all color. His hands were trembling. That's not true, he stammered. Dad was confused. He had memory issues near the end. Everyone knew that. This isn't a valid will. This was written by someone who wasn't of sound mind. Daniel, Mr. Patterson said calmly, your father had a full cognitive evaluation done by his physician 1 month before signing this will, specifically to preempt this exact concern. The evaluation is in the file. He scored within normal range for his age. This will is airtight. Daniel stood up so fast, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is bullshit. This is absolute bullshit. You, he pointed at me, his finger shaking. You've been poisoning him against me for years, filling his head with lies. You always wanted everything, didn't you? You always wanted to be the favorite. Daniel, I said quietly, I didn't know about any of this. The loans, the credit card. I had no idea. Don't act innocent, he shouted. You're probably the one who told him about the credit card thing. You probably went snooping through his mail like you always do. I hadn't. I genuinely hadn't. But there was no point arguing with him in that state. Mr. Patterson calmly informed Daniel that the will was final, that he had 30 days to contest it if he wished, but that given the documentation, bank statements showing the unauthorized credit card, signed loan acknowledgments Daniel himself had signed over the years, and the cognitive evaluation, a contest would almost certainly fail and would cost him significant legal fees. Daniel stormed out without another word. I didn't hear from him for almost 3 weeks. During that time, I quietly began the process of handling the estate. I met with Mr. Patterson multiple times. I learned things about my father's finances I never knew. He had been incredibly disciplined, reinvesting rental income for decades, living modestly despite having significant assets. The 4 rental properties were all in good neighborhoods, fully paid off, generating steady monthly income. The commercial building downtown housed a small bakery and a dentist's office, both long-term tenants. The investment portfolio was conservative but solid. I cried more during those 3 weeks than I had at the funeral itself. Not from sadness about money. I genuinely hadn't cared about money when I walked into that conference room. I cried because my father had seen me. All those years of quiet effort, all those Sunday dinners and pill organizers and late-night phone calls. He had seen all of it, and he had wanted me to know that it mattered. But I also felt sick about Daniel. He was still my brother. Despite everything, despite the favoritism I'd grown up watching, despite this betrayal my father had uncovered, Daniel was the only sibling I had. He finally called me on a Tuesday evening. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded different, smaller. "Hey, Danny, I hadn't called him that since we were kids. Can we talk? In person?" We met at a diner halfway between our places. Neutral ground, the kind of place we used to go as teenagers after Mom's funeral, when neither of us knew how to be in our childhood home without her. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, clothes that looked slept in. "I owe you an apology," he said, before I could even sit down fully. "What I said at the lawyer's office. I was out of line." "It's okay," I said. "You were in shock." "No, it's not okay." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Rock, I'm in trouble. Real trouble. The loans from Dad. I used most of that money to cover gambling debts. I have a problem. I've had a problem for years and I never told anyone because I was ashamed. I sat there, absorbing this. Part of me wasn't even surprised. The pieces had been there for years. I'd just refused to put them together. "The credit card thing," he continued, his voice cracking. "I did that because I owed money to people who were not the kind of people you want to owe money to." I panicked. I took out the card in Dad's name because mine was maxed out and my credit was destroyed. I paid it back eventually, but Dad found out before I could explain. "Danny, why didn't you ever tell me any of this? Because you always had it together," he said, louder than he meant to, then lowered his voice. "You had a kid, a divorce, a full-time job, and you still showed up every Sunday with a casserole and a smile. I couldn't tell you I was a degenerate gambler who stole from our dying father. I couldn't." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You're still my brother." He started crying, really crying, the kind of crying that comes from years of holding something in. "I need help, Rach, real help, like treatment, Gamblers Anonymous, therapy, all of it. I've hit rock bottom. I have nothing left." The $10,000 Dad left me. I already know I'll blow through it in 2 months if I don't get help first. This is the part of the story where you might expect me to say I forgave him completely, gave him a chunk of the inheritance, and we all lived happily ever after. That's not what happened. Not exactly. Here's what I actually did. I told Daniel that I loved him, that I was scared for him, and that I wanted to help him. But not by giving him money. Not yet. Money had been the thing that enabled his addiction for years, including money our father had given him under the guise of loans. Giving him a check, even with good intentions, would likely just feed the cycle. Instead, I offered something else. I told him I would pay, directly, to the facility, never to him, for a 90-day inpatient gambling addiction treatment program. I found one through my old paralegal connections, a respected place 2 hours away. I also told him that once he completed it, and only once he completed it, I would help him get back on his feet. Help him find an apartment, help him find a job, maybe even let him manage one of the rental properties for a modest salary, since Dad's properties needed a property manager anyway, and Daniel actually did have decent handyman skills from his brewery days. But I made it conditional. Real conditions. Therapy continuing after the program. Financial counseling. A no-contact agreement with the people he owed money to, which meant involving the police for his own protection, since some of those debts apparently came with implied threats. He resisted at first. Pride, mostly. But he was also terrified, genuinely terrified, of the people he owed money to. Within a week, he agreed. Now here's where the karma part of this story comes in, because life has a strange sense of humor. While Daniel was in treatment, I started managing the estate properly. I hired a property management company temporarily to handle the 4 rentals, while I focused on the commercial building downtown, the one with the bakery and dentist's office. About 6 weeks into Daniel's treatment, the dentist who rented the larger unit in the commercial building informed me he was retiring and not renewing his lease. This left a significant vacancy, a problem, but also an opportunity. Around the same time, I got a call from a woman named Carla, a former coworker of Daniel's from his brewery days. She'd heard through mutual friends that Daniel was getting help, and she reached out. Not about Daniel, actually, but about something else entirely. Carla's husband ran a small business consulting firm and was looking for affordable commercial office space downtown. The space I had, recently vacated by the dentist, was perfect. I rented it to them at fair market rate. Nothing dramatic there. But during our conversation, Carla mentioned something in passing that made my stomach drop. "You know," she said, "it's actually kind of funny you're handling all this now. A while back, some guy was going around to local landlords, including your dad, actually, before he passed, trying to get loans using rental income statements as proof of income. Pretty sure it was some shady lending thing connected to underground betting rings. Your dad mentioned it to my husband at a Rotary Club meeting, joking about how some idiot tried to use forged documents claiming to co-own one of his properties." I sat with that for a long moment. "Did my dad say who it was?" Carla hesitated. "He didn't say a name, but your dad seemed really shaken up about it afterward. My husband said he left the meeting early that day. This was maybe 8 or 9 months ago? 8 or 9 months ago, right around the time my father started his estate planning changes. I didn't say anything to Daniel about this, not directly, not as an accusation, but it gave me a much clearer picture of the full timeline. My father hadn't just discovered the credit card fraud and the gambling loans through bank statements. He had been confronted, in person, with evidence that his own son had used forged documents, implying co-ownership of his rental properties, to secure money from predatory lenders connected to illegal gambling operations. That's not just a son in financial trouble. That's a son who had, in his desperation, tried to put his father's entire life's work at legal risk. My father never told me any of this directly. I think it broke his heart too much to say it out loud. But it explained everything. Why he made the cognitive evaluation, why the will was so carefully worded, why he chose to protect everything by putting it entirely in my name rather than splitting it and risking Daniel using his half as more collateral for these people. My father wasn't just protecting his assets from a son who'd be irresponsible with money. He was protecting his entire estate, and by extension, me and Emma, from people who might come looking for their share of properties Daniel had fraudulently claimed partial ownership of. When Daniel completed his 90-day program, he came out a different person, genuinely different, calmer, more present, more honest. During one of our visits near the end of his program, during a family therapy session his counselor recommended, I gently brought up what Carla had told me. Not as an attack, just gently. Daniel broke down completely. He confirmed it. He had, in a moment of complete desperation, forged a document claiming joint ownership of one of the rental properties to use as collateral with a private lender connected to an illegal sports betting operation he owed money to. When that lender's associates started making calls to verify the documents, calls that reached my father directly, my father had to spend weeks quietly resolving it, paying off part of the debt himself to make the co-ownership claim disappear before it became a legal nightmare, and threatening legal action against the lenders if they continued contacting him. My father paid nearly $40,000 of his own money to clean up Daniel's mess, money that came out of what would have been Daniel's inheritance anyway, though Daniel never knew that either. He never told me he covered it, Daniel whispered. I thought it just went away. I thought I got lucky. He didn't want you to feel like you owed him, I said. He just wanted it to be over. It's been a little over a year now since my father passed. Daniel has been sober from gambling for 14 months. He attends meetings religiously, twice a week, sometimes more when things feel hard. He's been managing 2 of the 4 rental properties for almost a year now, doing maintenance, handling tenant relations, collecting rent. He takes a modest salary, enough to live on, enough to slowly rebuild his credit and his life. He moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment, one of the units in a building I now own, and pays rent like any other tenant, which he insisted on, even though I told him he didn't have to. I need to do this the right way, he told me. I need to feel like I earned something for once. He's also been paying back, slowly, the lenders who were owed money. Not out of fear anymore, but because he says he needs to close that chapter completely, on his own terms, with help from a financial counselor and, eventually, the police, who were able to help shut down part of that illegal lending operation once enough people came forward. As for the commercial building, the one Dad worried about so much, it's fully leased now. Carla's husband's consulting firm took the larger space, and a new tenant, a small physical therapy practice, took the smaller unit the bakery didn't need. The building generates more income now than it ever did under my father, simply because I had the time and energy to actually manage it properly, something my father, in his final years, no longer had the strength for. Emma, my daughter, just turned 13. She adores her Uncle Danny again, The real Danny, the one who shows up to her soccer games now, the one who isn't disappearing for weeks at a time anymore. Sometimes I think about that day in the conference room, the shock of it, the anger I felt toward Daniel in that moment, even if I tried not to show it. If you had told me, sitting in that room, that within a year Daniel and I would be closer than we'd ever been, closer than we were even as kids, I wouldn't have believed you. My father's letter said he hoped someday Daniel would understand why he made the choice he did. I think Daniel understands now, not just intellectually, but in his bones. My father didn't cut him off because he didn't love him. He cut him off because he did love him. Enough to force a reckoning that, frankly, probably saved his life. People sometimes ask me if I regret not splitting the inheritance 50-50 from the start, out of some sense of fairness. They ask if I feel guilty. I don't. Because the truth is, if I had handed Daniel a check for over $1 million the day that was read, in the state he was in, with the people he owed money to, with the addiction eating him alive, that money wouldn't have saved him. It would have killed him. Slowly, or maybe not so slowly. My father knew that. He saw it more clearly than either of us could in his final months, even while his body was failing him. He made one last decision. A hard, painful, controversial decision. Not to punish his son, but to save him. And it worked. Every Sunday now, Daniel comes for dinner. He brings dessert. Usually something simple, store-bought, sometimes a little burnt if he tried to make it himself. We sit at the same kitchen table where I used to organize Dad's pills on a whiteboard. Emma does her homework at the counter while Daniel and I talk about tenant issues or maintenance schedules, or sometimes nothing at all, just life. Last week, Daniel brought something with him besides dessert, a small wrapped box. Inside was Dad's old wristwatch, the one he'd been left in the will. "I want Emma to have this someday," he said, "when she's older. Tell her it was Grandpa's. Tell her he was the smartest man either of us ever knew." I think my father would have liked that. I think he'd have liked all of it, eventually. Share this with someone who needs to hear this. Drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe. And I'll see you soon in the next one.